Our Teams meeting mic is now unmuted, so everybody remotely will be hearing everything in the room. And if you are a presenter or speaker, you might want to make sure at this time your mic is unmuted next to you.
So we just push on these little things so they're green. There you go. Yours is still red. Brandon, there you go. Perfect. All right. Pardon me?
Zach and Cameron, not on your list, but I did send them the stuff. He just got on lunch, so.
Okay, thank you.
And, Elizabeth's
Yeah.
gonna be attending. Oh, it's on. Okay,
Uh-huh.
good.
Thanks. All right. And you all didn't meet each other. You don't need to jump up or anything, but Kelly and Teresa, you want to introduce yourselves and go ahead, Kelly.
Kind of in South Central Missouri. Our office is based in St. James, in Phelps County. And I work in the project development department. So we help a lot of our cities and counties do grant writing, grant administration, that kind of stuff.
And Teresa?
I'm Teresa David, and so we're actually an engineering company, but through that, we started writing grants, and we've done the lion's share of what we have done, cities and counties, countless ones. That's, side. And so we started getting into the margin.
We'll be interested to hear on that. That's good.
Yeah. They call them stacked applications. Stacked, and you have one in for application. Right now,
All right.
we're hopeful. We'll see what happens.
All righty. What, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're at 1 o'clock. If just as a housekeeping, if you have a speaker in front of you and it's on green, you may want to turn it on red. There's a little button right there. So anyway, everybody, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate it. This is kind of awkward because we're talking mostly to an empty room, but there were about 35. Oh, there's Rala. 35 people signed up for this today. So thank you very much for joining us. And thanks to the speakers who came a long way to share this information with us. You're at the first MPUA grants workshop today, and we have quite a bit to share. The objective, of course, of this workshop is to walk through the grant writing process with speaker perspectives and on the elements of a successful grant application. And we're looking, of course, to be helpful to you to respond to current federal funding programs and opportunities that are in front of you. Participants, all of you can expect to hear specific examples on how others have answered the challenges and opportunities of this current grant environment. And so we're going to try to keep things on time. And so we'll go ahead and start with city utilities, and I will ask our speakers to please introduce yourselves. And then you have the clicker and go ahead and start your presentation. We'll let them go through the presentation, and then we'll have a little Q&A time after they're finished. So with that, Brandy and Brandon, take it away.
Good afternoon. My name is Brandy Fisher. I'm with City Utilities. I'm a transit grants analyst. And then with me, I have Brandon.
My name is Brandon Braun. I'm manager of our natural gas and water engineering department.
And Elizabeth invited us here today to talk about the infrastructure grant program that we recently applied for. Brandon and I were both part of that team. Some of the topics specifically that Elizabeth asked us to speak about were the outputs and objectives section of the NOFO, how did city utilities incorporate the disadvantaged communities into our grant application? And how did city utilities develop our project budget?
Can I interrupt you for just 1 second?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm so sorry. I should have set this up the first way. As everyone is probably aware at this point, there are various sources of funding, obviously, where money comes into these grants. And the ones for which we've all been applying, the source has been ARPA funding. So the grant that they're presenting on is unique because it's literally the first and only that I'm aware of IIJA-based grant application. And we don't know yet if they've gotten the grant. They were supposed to find out next month. And at the end of the program, Ken will talk about his experience in applying for some IIJA funds as well. But anyway, I just wanted to clarify that these two they're pioneers today. So I'm sorry to interrupt, Brandy. Go right ahead.
So we just wanted to start out with a few grant writing tips and suggestions, just some quick things that we felt were important as we worked through our grant application. We felt it was always important to align the budget and the project narrative to make sure that we were saying the same things, be consistent in our wording and make sure that we are telling a clear story. We included tables and graphs when appropriate, trying to explain information that maybe was harder to understand in text. Be sure to address all of the information in the notice of funding paper. I think it was like a 40-page document, but it's really important to go through and make sure you're answering all the questions that they're asking. Explain your organization's abilities to successfully manage the grant. When you're asking for a lot of money, it's great to write a good grant application, but also giving them confidence that your agency can appropriately manage those grants once they're received is important as well. It's important to enlist content proofreaders. I'm a transit person, so I kind of came into this blind. I'm not familiar with a lot of the gas industry lingo and those types of things. So it was important for our group to go back and forth just to make sure that we were saying the correct things. And then be aware of post-award requirements. A lot of these federal fundings have things associated with them that you have to do. I think the big one on this one was the Buy America. So just make sure that you understand all of the post-award requirements that are going to be asked of you. So on the notice of funding, it listed projected outputs and objectives as a required section to the project narrative. At City Utilities, we chose to focus on reducing the risk identified in our City Utilities Distribution Integrity Management Program, or DIMP plan, and prioritizing the replacement of legacy plastic pipe in the disadvantaged areas of our community. The outputs, there were 4 that the NOFO talked about. It talked about safety, environmental, job creation, and equity. So on the safety section, they asked to talk about how the project would improve safety, reduce incidents, reduce methane leaks, those sorts of things. So in our grant application, we chose to focus on the DIMP plan and how this award would address, I believe, 7 of our top 10 identified issues in the DIMP plan. So that was one of the ways that we chose to reflect how this would improve safety of our system. We also spoke about historical information on leaks and damages on our current system. And output criteria number 2, environmental. The NOFO asked for us to describe how the project contributed to protecting the environment. We were part of a larger utility work group, so there were 3 or 4 other utilities, and we just kind of got together to bounce ideas off of each other and how we were all interpreting the notice of funding. And one of the things that was brought up in that group was there are these calculators, these emissions calculators that you can find on the internet, I guess. And those are good ways to be able to answer the environmental question. And we actually went about it a little bit different, and Brandon will talk about how we calculated our emissions.
Yeah, so I can speak on that a little bit. Like she said, that was one of the main criterias that they emphasized in their notice of funding. And and there was 3, they emphasized pipe replacement for this project, but there's also, you could submit other projects that were safety, modernization of your system. But in regard to the pipe replacement and the emissions reduction that that project would benefit from, they reference some calculators. GTI has a calculator and some guidance through like EPA's way to determine like the emissions reduction. For example, we don't have any of it anymore in our system, but like cast iron gas main, there's more leaks per mile. You know, when you look at all the cast iron gas main in America, there's more leaks per mile for that type of main. So when you replace that main, there's this calculation that gives you a quantity of emissions that you are reducing. Our project, we didn't really go down that calculator route because our replacement project we proposed is legacy plastic. So it's plastic main. So when we replace our plastic main with new plastic main, it's a newer genre. It's it's newer material. The emissions calculator didn't give us that much credit. And so we went down a path of identifying all the leaks caused by tear outs on this type of main that we have in our system, and that's, we use like our DIMP plan and other resources to come up with that. But another key component of why we want to replace this main is that it's not locatable, or most of it is unlocatable. We have trouble locating a lot of this main. So we tied our emissions reduction portion of it to like the amounts of tear outs we could potentially reduce by replacing the main. So we took a little bit different avenue on coming up with answering that question than maybe some others would that are replacing like cast iron or bare steel mains in their system. So that was just an avenue we chose to do in our application to kind of bolster our emissions portion of our application.
So the third output criteria was job creation, and they asked for a lot in the NOFO. I think this was the biggest section of the output request. But essentially, they were focusing on 4 things. They were focusing on job creation, workforce opportunities for underrepresented groups, partnerships with training providers and community colleges, and economic growth and development. One of the things that was discussed a lot in some of our work groups for this section was there was a software, some type of economic development software that would project, help you project what the impact of your project would be on the local economy. And we didn't have access to that, so we just kind of utilized the things that we did have access to. So things that we included in this section included internal opportunities at city utilities and salaries. We had a letter of support from our local union, our internal union, supporting the grant. We talked about external opportunities and how they would be paid at prevailing wage. And there were other components that we were able to find on our local Chamber of Commerce website that gave us some information that we could put kind of into this job creation section. The fourth output criteria was equity, and the NOFO asked if the project benefited a disadvantaged community or areas of poverty. And so primarily for this section, we went back to the census data, and we used a lot of census data to talk about things like demographics, annual income, just those types of things that related to the areas where we were proposing to do a project. And so this page number, I think, is incorrect. This link is included in the NOFO, but I don't think it's page 40. There were a couple of different versions, but the NOFO provided a map to what they identified the disadvantaged communities to be. And so if you follow that link, you can zoom into your area and it shades the areas, or the census blocks, I think is how it tracks it. It shades those in like a peach color. So we went out and we grabbed that map, and then we asked our GIS team to overlay some of the other items that was asked for in the NOFO, some of the other topics of discussion, like the environmental items, those kinds of things. So if you look on this map, this is one of our project areas. In the bottom right corner, those peach shaded areas, those were the census blocks that were identified through this link as being a disadvantaged community. And the star on that map is the project location. So you can see that it's identified within the appropriate census block. We also,
Could everybody online please be sure that you have muted your microphones, and then when we have a question and answer session, if you could, we'll unmute then. Okay, I'm hearing a little background noise. Just wanted to make sure. So thank you. Sorry to interrupt
no,
again.
you're fine. So a couple of the other things that we identified on this map were the I think it's kind of small, so I can't read it, but I believe that the red dots are like historic properties. So things that would have come up in our environmental review. There's some identification of brownfields, I believe that's probably the triangle, and then maybe some floodplain issues in the upper left. So we just felt like it was important to overlay all of the other items that were discussed in the NOFO on top of one map, so that we could reference back to that one map and show a complete picture rather than continually reference to several different maps that were showing different things. And then the other thing, as far as disadvantaged communities, we chose to tie in the common thread of disadvantaged communities in all of the major sections of our grant application. We didn't just talk about it in the equity section of the output. We tried to tie that common theme in the project summary when we talked about project location, project description, statement of work, and then of course the projected outputs and objectives that we talked about previously. So going back to keeping the message consistent, we wanted to be sure that we thoroughly explained how this project would impact the disadvantaged communities in our area. And then next we'll talk about project budget, and Brandon will talk about that.
Yeah, so I can speak to our project budget. Before going into that, I just got to give one, I mean, Brandy, this being, this grant that we applied for was directly for publicly owned natural gas operators. And we understand that, we're one of the larger maybe operators in the states, and maybe Missouri, if I'm right on that. And so having somebody with experience in writing grants was tremendous help to us. And we, I don't know, we may have could have done it without her, but I thought she made it a breeze for us. So any kind of resources or any kind of utilization of somebody with specific, even other grant writing process was definitely a huge advantage. Me being an engineer, not understanding, not ever being in that, doing that type of work in the application process was a great help. And along with that, starting with the project budget, going to other conferences and speaking to other operators that were applying for this funding as well. Our projects vary in scope. And so when you set up your budget, you got to look at your scope of resources. You may not be applying for a project specifically to replace gas main. It may be equipment or some kind of cross compression emissions, other equipment you might use in your operations. And so this project kind of outlined how we did our budget, not necessarily how it has to be done in all the projects. So you got to look, at your scope, utilizing existing staff, contractual resources. So we don't have the capacity in our utility to take on this whole project. So we have to start thinking about the resources that we have to go seek and look at what that costs. Part of the process, we analyze some of our historical main replacement projects. So we do this type of work yearly. So we went back and looked like the past 3 years of our project cost, and kind of analyze that to help project our future costs, and if you think back the past 3 years with COVID and gas prices and inflation, fuel, in Springfield area, it seems that skilled labor, there is a lot of, it's hard to, there's not an abundance of skilled labor that, actually performs the work, construction work. So our third-party contractors and hiring new people is a continued challenge. But analyzing those past projects, we kind of have to project our future costs. So we did some analysis over the past 3 years, kind of projected out where we think we're going to be within the next 3 years for like the timeline of this grant. So talking a little bit more detail in the budget process, I broke it down into like 2 categories. So our direct cost and then overhead. Some of our direct costs that we looked at is our contracted services. So anything we would contract with environmental. So like in specific, the tier 2 environmental assessment that's going to be a part of this. We're large enough, we do have an environmental department that would assist us in this, but we also put some money in the budget to seek even some consultant help if we were to get the process and if we were to get the grant and walk us through that process. Contracted engineering services, so third-party design, third-party survey for any kind of right-of-way, construction staking, those types of costs. And then construction inspection, the majority of our work is done by third-party contractors. We have an in-house inspection group, but we're limited in the amount of resources. And if this project would drive up some of that, we would have to look into contracting out some of those in-house services. Material, so when we try to budget material, that was challenging. That seemed to be like a category that is with supply chain issues and material availability, rising cost, although, material is a smaller portion of the overall budget. It's over the past 3 years, it's been hard to get a handle on availability and cost. So we took that into consideration. And then labor. So when I say labor, I'm meaning internal labor. So that's, CU personnel, that's engineers, designers, gas system installers, equipment operators, pressure control technicians, all the direct costs, their hourly rates, how much man hours do they have associated with each project. And those direct costs are, easier for maybe an engineer to come up with and estimate. When we got into the overhead portions, we brought in our finance team to help us out with that. How we allocate all of our overhead to specific personnel, specific task. With material, for example, we purchase our own material. And so we have storeroom overhead, purchasing department overhead. Labor, finance came in and explained all the additional costs, for paid sick leave, vacation, employee benefits, vehicle and equipment overhead. So, every hour that machine sits on a job or is used on a job, there's the operation and maintenance cost of that, that they really helped us understand and estimate those costs. And then, excuse me, the A&G cost, the administrative in general. PHMSA did touch on this in the grant application as an indirect cost, like a 10% de minimis rate. They threw that out there. With our experience with receiving federal funding, we already had an agreement set up with FTA, which is a little bit more than that for our A&G costs. And so we mentioned that in our application, but we would be open to if our processes are set up to use that higher rate, but we'd be open to, adjusting that down if that was appropriate for this project. This next slide gets smaller, but going back, these are all the costs. And then PHMSA had two budget forms that they wanted you to fill out for the application. And one is this table that you see here on the right. That's PHMSA's procurement of property and services form. And so you see all the different type of, personnel, fringe benefit, travel, equipment, supplies there on the right. So out of all those costs that we do on a normal project and allocate, we had to pair them with the appropriate category on this PHMSA budget chart here. This was an Excel file they provided. And then also there was another form and it's a grants.gov budget form. They have that number there, but it's a little bit larger form. If you can see on the PowerPoint slide here, and it breaks up these categories into even more smaller subcategories of our overall project budget. I mentioned of this because this was a lot of question in the application and follow up with PHMSA is like, what category does certain costs go into? I can tell you from my perspective, we never really received like, direct guidance or this type of work goes in this category. The main thing that they encourage you to do is just document where you're putting, certain costs, so that out of the whole budget process, you have a way to come up with your own budget, but then you have to submit it in these tables. And just the advice there was just be able to regurgitate where the money went into those subcategories. So we did a really good job of, we have Excel sheets tracking, color coding, this pot of money went to this category along with this. So, following up, wrapping up the budget thing, that was one of the bigger takeaways when you go to submit your budget with the application. And for example, some of these categories we left blank. Like you see supplies, and travel, those were $0. We weren't seeking any reimbursement for what we consider to be a definition of a supplies, pens, papers, printers, that kind of stuff. We weren't seeking any reimbursement for that. We don't expect to have to travel for this project either. So it was okay to leave some of these blank. But that's all I had as far as the budget goes, and that would kind of wrap up our portion of this.
So
So
I had a question, actually two, and one was, the replacement was part of a plan that you already had, correct? And so if you had this budgeted, how did you work that? Like if you already had a budget for these kind of improvements, how did you rework things so that it didn't look like?
So yeah, this was a common question in some other peer utility groups that we met with, and we talked about this supplant versus supplement. And we even sought some guidance through APGA, American Public Gas Association, who was kind of a liaison with PHMSA in some of these questions. And again, not really, I think it's their intent, that you try to supplant as much of this funding as you can to drive jobs, to, do more than what you currently are. And we even followed up with some formal guidance, with like personnel. We already have existing people on staff, like pressure technicians that would perform work, and if we included, they do work on all of our jobs, but it's not their primary duty, but they're already existing on staff. Would that be looked at as not, supplanting that, that they're already existing staff? But we received a response that indicated that that's okay, and any, try to use any of those other funds to either expand the scope of what the intention of the project is, or, do more within your organization to keep that up. We also say, we do have an ongoing main replacement program at our utility. But we're only funded, our budget's only approved for 1 year at a time. And so budgets could very well change year to year, and especially with rising costs, we're not able to do as much for the dollar. And so this maybe, help us get to a target where we want to be, that's supplanting it. We wouldn't do that much work because we're limited in budget, and this will help us get us to those targets. But really, I don't think we ever there was ever clear guidance on the supplant versus supplement conversation. And I think other peer utilities kind of were in the same boat, you know, and especially for like a special project, you know, you have a project in your organization that, you know, it's going to take 10 years to fund, you know, for somebody. And so this project coming in would totally be an avenue to, hey, let's go after that project in lieu of trying to work it into your budget year after year after year. But, you know, you're budgeting for it to eventually do it. And so, you know, we are budgeting to eventually do our main replacement program.
Okay.
And so, I don't
One
know
of
if that totally answered the question.
Yeah.
I was going to add on just a little bit to what Brandon
Sure.
said. He kind of hit on it at the end. The projects in these disadvantaged communities may not have been a priority replacement, so it may have been years down the road, and this grant opportunity would bring that to the forefront. So it would make it more of an immediate replacement. So that was one of the things that we talked about in our application too. So yes, years down the road, there may be funding for it, but if we get this grant application, then it's something that we can accomplish in the next 3 to 5 years.
And then before I open it, I had one other question, and maybe if I could start with you, Brandy, because I really was so thankful, I know all of us were, to be able to eavesdrop on your planning process, which was really impressive. Tell me about assembling the team of people to tackle, because I mean, it was like, it takes a village. Takes a village grant time. It was really interesting. Who did you bring in, and how did you guys go about assembling that group?
So it was interesting. So in the very beginning, it started with the gas group, Brandon, Casey, and Steve, and they started looking over the application and they requested that I come over, just bounce some ideas off. So it started kind of out as our group of 4. And as we went through the grant application, we started to identify things like with the Build America, Buy America, the environmental portion. We have areas of our utility that deal with those things commonly. Like I said, I work on the transit side and we have FTA grants, so we're familiar with some of these requirements. So that was kind of our key to bring in someone for purchasing to help us with the Buy America component. We brought in 2 or 3 people from our environmental area to kind of help us work through that tier 1 analysis that talks in the NOFO. Brandon mentioned earlier, we brought in finance. You know, they are kind of the budget authority, you know, when we submit up. So we wanted to make sure that we had their buy-in and we were all on the same page from the beginning when we submitted. So I think when it was all said and done, I think that we probably had a team of, I don't know, I would say 10 people probably that worked on this grant off and on. And then even external to our group, you know, we had a smaller, like a utility, you know, like 3 or 4 other utilities that we would have a conference call with and just kind of say, you know, this is how we're interpreting this. Are you interpreting it the same way? Or, you know, these are the types of things that we're going to put in this section. Does that sound on par with kind of what you're doing? And then as Brandon also stated, with the APGA, they played a huge role in going back and forth between PHMSA and their members, seeking clarification, putting together FAQs. I think at the very end of the application process, there was over 100 FAQs, a document that was answered. So they played a huge role too. So it really was a village effort for sure.
Anything else, Brandon?
No, she nailed it. Yeah, our team at City Utilities was comprised of a lot of people. And so a little daunting, you know, as, you know, a single department and not being familiar with the process. So it definitely helped out that we assembled that team.
Perfect. All right. Well, with that, we are running right on time. Like I said, we have just a couple of communities here, and thank you both for being here. And then we have a whole bunch of people, like 32 people out in the field. So at this time, we'll open it. Does anyone have any questions of the panelists at this time? Just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask. Anyone? Nope. All right. Okay. Well, anyway, what we'll do then is I don't see any questions in the chat. All right. Well, we will go ahead then and thank Brandy and Brandon, for coming. We really, really appreciate your time and your expertise very much. And so we'll wrap this portion up and then we're actually going to, for anybody on, we're going to start about 10 minutes early then. So let's take a short break and we'll come back at, let's say 1:40 and we'll reconvene and we'll start over again. So we're running about 10 minutes ahead. So thank you both very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We'll be back in about 10 minutes. Thank you. Welcome, Rolla.
Good to be.
Good to see you.
Good to be seen.
You guys, if you want, obviously there are drinks in the kitchen. Please help yourself. You found it.
I know where it is.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. Guys, thank you again and be very careful. You don't have any shopping or anything fun to do while you're doing it? Oh. Dude. Oh, well, it's always good to have a colleague.
Right
to tell
back
your-
down.
Okay.
Well, thank you for having us.
That's,
Impressive.
that's, in talking to other operators, from the bigger numbers.
Wow. Just within Missouri or within the nation?
Within the nation. So when we said, like the peer groups like Knoxville, Tallahassee, some, Omaha. They have to bring in the representatives.
And you find out next month?
Oh, we're supposed to find out in October.
Oh.
But,
Yeah, so you're right on time, really.
Right on time.
Yeah, to kind of caveat what Brandon said, we talked in our application a lot about scalable projects. So we identified several projects that we broken out and basically said we would accept any level of funding, but we do fund our whole project. But we had different project areas identified like that before. I think, you know,
Well, good luck to you guys. Well, it'd be nice to see those tax dollars come back to Missouri.
It's a big chunk, yeah.
That'll be interesting to see who gets the,
Yeah.
because you really, like, these guys, you had to be on top of it to be ready to, like, so.
even in our. Following our.
It would be very good.
Fortunately, we had
It's been a roller coaster. And, funding request that they continue. So it's a 5-year. Year one. 170, I think there's more applications than others. Applications over a billion. So we heard that, we're like, oh, our chances.
They were also encouraging at least APTA. This is with something, never know. So there could have been a lot of applications. The other thing that we was our experience. Several times. Our FTA director said. I mean, and the money every year. Talk about our single audits, you know. Our group.
First thing set up. All that.
Yeah. You know, we already had that experience in money kind of thing, so we were kind of hoping that that might.
I think, here, like all, as far as I know, I don't think for anything but just permanent Potosi. I heard Potosi. And I heard for.
Trying to think of.
So the Washington County, they, all right, perfect. All right, well, you guys, thank you again. Appreciate it. I know this is a little weird speaking to this big room, but you guys have a lot of people, so I appreciate it.
Are there any
Again,
other questions that come up?
I will, I'll share.
All of that.
Okay, I appreciate it. Yeah, I know we'll be sharing everybody's contact information in the PowerPoints for sure, so I was gonna ask information. Absolutely, like, yes, absolutely. Yeah, nope. All right, thank you. Thanks, you guys. Be careful. Great to meet you. Bye, thank you. All right. Counting on you. There you go. You got 2 minutes. All right. I think, I'm gonna run to the ladies' room real quickly.
Here's where you at, Todd, when, they did the Goodman Elementary.
I applied for it, I did an application for it, and then there. And they all submitted me. Then I came. Well, we were dead, all three. And that was in transition.
Okay.
By the time they got funded.
Uh-huh.
And Betty Benson, who says works there, she had gotten started to the ready and grants in the past. Other places. So she actually. the one
Well, I wonder, because I went to Goodman Elementary, you know,
really?
that day, but I could not tell, from, just from driving by it, because my dad actually still lives in Goodman and he lived in there, as in my house, but did they repurpose any of that old brick from the original?
You know, I don't know, so it wasn't, so I'm not for sure. So I know about the original application that turned in and saved it was being the gym in the building.
Okay.
They had this, they had building. Over the time, they said, all right.
With a minute to spare. All right, if you two want to hit your buttons, actually, yeah, I think I've got you teed up first. Let me check. Yeah, I got teed up first. So if you could hit and then we'll go ahead and, all right, everybody, thank you for being here again. We're getting ready for the second part of our presentation. We have a consultant who will work to give us an overview and provide some insights on grant applications. And then, of course, following that, we have Kelly Sinclair with Merrimack Regional Planning Commission, another experienced grant writer. And what we're going to do is have both of these two go through their presentations, and then we'll do kind of a panel at the end where you guys can ask questions of both of them. So we're going to go ahead and start that way. And I'm going to start with Teresa Lehman with Toth, because we have those slides ready to go first. And again, I'll ask everybody if you're, please make sure you're on mute. And then when we get to the Q&A section, obviously unmute yourself to do that. So go ahead, Teresa, it's all yours.
Hi, everybody. I'm with Toth and Associates. I actually started with them in 2010. And I started off as a utility rate analyst. So I did that for about a year. And it was around, I started helping a little in grants, and around the time the Joplin tornado happened, we had some structural engineers on staff that had been involved in tornado safe rooms. And they had been working on that a little bit. And of course, with that, it blew up.
And I started doing grant work after that with them, and that's what I've been doing with them ever since. We're an engineering firm, and I've just put a little bit of blurb about who we are and what our vision is here on our PowerPoint. We started off as an electrical utility engineering company, and then we've added in structural engineering. This is just, here we go, core values. So we pride ourselves on our professional expertise. We've got a can-do attitude. We try to find a way to make things work if at all possible. We build relationships, external and internal, and we look to the future to grow and how we can help others do the same. And so we started with the electrical utility engineering first. That was our core business, I guess you would say, originally. And then structural engineering came in, and shortly after that, civil engineering came on board, and other services that we provide are our GIS and mapping group, which we use a lot for grants. They help us get a lot of our information and exhibits. Grant writing and administration, which is my area. We do land services, land survey, and as I said, of course, the utility electric rate analysis and utility rates. So some of having that as a tool for me as a grant writer is very beneficial. So some of the things that city utilities talked about, they have those internally at city utilities. So for smaller groups that aren't lucky enough to have such a large staff, then we have access to people right there on our staff that can help us with the technical terms and the lingo. Like they said, we may know how to write a grant and how to hit all the right notes, but we can't come up with all the technical wording to properly state some of the information that needs to be in the grant application. So what we have access to, we've got actually now 5 office locations. Our main office is in Springfield, Missouri, and we have 161 employees. 60 of those are engineers that we have access to. And then you can see there the various different types of employees we have. And in our group, we have in the rates and grants group, we have 7 of us that are available to work just on that. And then, of course, in addition, the support staff that we can use with GIS and office staff. And there's Lou Toth there and Adam, and this is just a little look at our leadership team there at Toth. Some of them I'm sure a lot of you probably know. Okay, so the main reason why we're here, so to talk about grants. So one of the biggest things that happens is people hear about a grant and then they come and they want to be a part of the grant. They don't have there's no real planning. They haven't planned ahead to try to look at, is this grant a good fit for the project that you're wanting to do? And so really the starting point is looking at your 5 to 10 year plan, looking out, starting to work with a grant writer and possibly an engineering firm so that you can start looking at what things could potentially be good for grants. And then you have help for trying to make that good fit between the actual project and a grant that's a good fit, rather than we want this project done. Let's try to push it into this grant, even if it's not a good fit. So I think starting early and really looking at the opportunities as they become available is really important. Then timing is a big issue as well. And they were talking about their estimating, and you look at, what are the costs today? What do we want? What do we think this may cost? When will we get this money? What may it cost then? And does that timing work? Is this something that's more emergent? We need to get this done now? Or can we wait 5 years to see if we get the funding? So finding also projects that you want to do, they're on your long-range plan, but that they don't need to be done within the next year, because typically you will not get funding within a year on most grants to be out there actually starting to do the construction work on it. So if engaging a grant writer and, possibly an engineering firm to help with identifying the grant opportunities and how to tie that to your specific projects. And then you have resources outside of just your personnel who may be overworked already to try to look at the specific data that's needed, the documentation that's needed in order to support this scope of work, being able to estimate that project, and then being able to turn in, if you find that good fit, on what some may call a notice of interest. There could be a letter of intent. There's different ways that you put in depending on the type of funding. Once you get past that first initial hurdle, if you've put in and let them know you're interested and you actually get asked now to do an application, you will want to do your procurement for engineering services and grant writing and administration services, assuming those are things you need help with. And procurement is a very important part of the process. If you don't get it right the first time, you can lose out on funding. It's a very important part of the process that you need to be sure you get done accurately. Then once you have everyone on board on your team, you've got to determine the location or locations that your project will be located at. Then permits are typically, for most types of projects, are required, different ones for different types of projects. Then for a lot of projects, you may need to identify whether you've had outages or damages previously to help justify this project and why they should choose you over someone else. And then also, you'll have a lot of exhibits that you have to create, and the city utilities team spoke about that as well. Charts, tables, all different types of exhibits that you need other than just the narrative and the words in that application. And I know one of the things that Elizabeth was wanting us to kind of speak to is the project narrative, and having a very clear and concise explanation of the problem you want to solve and how does that tie back to this grant opportunity. If you can't tie that back to the funding eligibility requirements, it's probably not the right fit. It's probably not the right grant for that project. And sometimes you may want to do a certain type of project to get help with, and you're looking for a grant for that. Maybe you have to look at your 5 to 10 year plan and say, well, this one may not be a good fit. Maybe if we look at a different project, getting that funded, that could free up our resources so that we might be able to afford to do the one we thought we wanted the grant. So you have to be open to, you know, if you get really tunnel vision that we just want to get a grant for this one specific thing, it can really shut you down at looking at full opportunities for all the different types of projects that you might be able to look at. You want to be sure that you explain why the proposed project is the best solution to the problem. You need to stress the need for this project to be completed and why the funding is needed. And focus on things that make your project stand out over other projects. Why should they choose you, your project? So, and all the time tying all these things back to your project and what the funding opportunity is saying they want to see in it, and tying that together continually. And they were saying that as well at City Utilities, that they kept tying it back to the disadvantaged communities. And one of the biggest things is there's scoring criteria, and every point counts. So if you have the opportunity, maybe the match is supposed to be 90-10, but you have the opportunity to do 88-12, and you get points for that. I've talked to people about this, and you know, a lot of times the answer is, well, we just want to get the 90-10. Well, that could be the difference of zero. You know, the 90% of zero is zero. So it is hard, and I know everybody has budgets and things that they have to look at, but being open to really looking at each criteria and trying to get every point that you can make all the difference in the world. So one of the other things that I think can happen, and you know, with having an engineer present for City Utilities, and some of what he said, they can get very technical. And so when someone is trying to understand what they're saying, you need to have technical information in there, but you also have to understand that the people who review these grants probably are not engineers. They probably are not experts in the field that you are trying to get this project for. So writing it in definitely a professional manner, and, you know, but also understanding that writing it toward the audience of who may be reading that narrative and trying to understand, does it fit and match with the funding opportunity, and using their words out of that funding opportunity when you can, so that they know that's what you're tying it to. This is kind of going on down the line now. So you've done your application, you've been successful, you've gotten the award. And so you may have procured a grant administrator if you don't have the staff or the expertise. Again, going back to City Utilities, you know, they're large, and they have, they're lucky that they have staff that can do a lot of this for them. So if you don't, having somebody to administer the grant for you, helping you through the procurement process, being sure that proper procurement has been done, and knowing how to document that to get that information turned in. Then you obviously, you want to get reimbursed by this grant, having someone who knows all the ins and outs of how does the reimbursement process work, what documentation is needed and what format, so that that's a very smooth process. When it gets turned in, you're not waiting for a long time to get your reimbursement from the grant. So that's something that a grant administrator can help you with, that process all the way through. And then there's typically required periodic reporting, that that grant administrator should also help with to keep that project on track as well. And then once the project is completed, all the construction has happened, everything is finished out. Typically, there's final documentation that will have to be submitted before the granting entity can close out your grant. And so having someone there that knows the ins and outs, these are some examples of things that might be required at the end. And having someone there with you every step of the way that's been compiling this documentation from the start to the middle to the end, and having that there so that you're not fumbling for that and trying to come up with all of that right at the end and not quite understanding maybe what they may be asking for. So a typical grant cycle, once you've turned in your application, you would wait for your grant approval. Then you would have some grant documents to sign. Most will give a grant orientation, so a lot of the things that they were mentioning on city utilities, the things that will be required, they'll go over that. You may even be provided a book of those items. And then you'll start in with your design for your project. And then you have to, again, that ugly procurement, you've got to come in, you've got to make sure we get the contractor. If you're not doing the work yourself, get your contractor on board. If it is a type of a project that requires any special testing, being sure you procure those services properly. And once that's done, moving in, getting the project constructed, and then going into that, a closeout meeting or the closeout process, and being sure that you have all the documentation there. And typically, depending on the type of grant, you'd be looking at from the time you get the funding to complete the project anywhere from 18 to 36 months. So looking backwards from there, you've probably started your whole process of trying to figure out what project you want, putting in a notice of interest, then a big ask for an application, then doing the application, and the application gets turned in, then it goes through this whole, approval process. You may be looking, it could be 2 years, even longer, by the time you're actually starting the project. So when you get into times like we have now, where costs are changing, you also have to be prepared that you've asked for a certain amount of a grant. And sometimes there might be an opportunity for more money, depending on the type of grant and depending on the funding entity. But many times the grant that you get is the grant that you get. And we have people ask us all the time, well, will they increase that grant for inflation? And typically, no. Whatever those bids come in and whatever that is over that projected grant amount, that's 100% back on you. So that can make it tough when we've had these last few years and how much the costs have changed from the beginning of the cycle until it actually got funded. Some of these costs have gone up a significant amount. So one of the things that I know some of you may be interested in could be like a line hardening project. So just to give kind of a quick just example of that type of a project, that could be handled with a FEMA hazard mitigation assistance grant. There's 2 different types of FEMA mitigation money. One is done on a federal disaster declaration, and one is an annual funding round. Missouri does both of those the same way, where you start with a notice of interest, then they decide who they're asking to develop an application, and then you would go into your actual, if you're funded, then go into what we would do at that point would be grant administration. So the two types, what used to be, if you guys are familiar, it used to be PDM or pre-disaster mitigation. They've changed that now to Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC. That it's not guaranteed, I don't think, but so far it's an annual nationally competitive grant round. So that's something that can kind of be relied on. And the timing is fairly similar. And every year that dollar amount changes, and it's been going up really by quite a lot over the last few years, to where it's, $1 billion that can go across all the states, territories, and tribes. So this is something that can be done. A note for that one is private nonprofits are not eligible to be the applicant on their own behalf, but you can partner with someone to apply on your behalf. So let's say if you're an electric cooperative and you're a private nonprofit, you could work with the city that your headquarters is in, or a county, because they can partner on your behalf. Then you have to look at maybe a partnership agreement, like an MOU or something like that. But don't feel like that you are excluded from that just because you're a private nonprofit. You just have to be a little more creative and find someone that you could have a good working relationship with. The other type is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, and that's the disaster based. So it's, if there's a disaster declared, then depending on the amount of money in the disaster, then hazard mitigation gets funded a % of that money to do mitigation projects. Typically, it starts off, if you were in the county that was declared, then depending on as the disaster size grows, so something like a Joplin size disaster, then they might open it to the whole state. So that's something that is also available to look at for, let's say, like a line hardening project. And the nice thing about these line hardening projects, they're scalable, and that's one of the things that City Utilities was talking about as well. So let's say maybe you have 10 different line sections that you would like to replace. You can look at that as one whole project, but then also it could be funded as pieces and parts of that, and maybe only fund a couple of those line sections, depending on the amount of money that was available. So when we look at the hazard mitigation grants, those are a 75-25 matching grant. And again, if it's not estimated correctly, if costs continue to go up, the 75% is set. However, if any money becomes available just in that funding source, if someone said they were taking a grant and they had to drop out for some reason, then you could potentially ask for additional funds. It's never guaranteed. You have to look at it that 75% is what you would get, but there is a chance you could get additional money. The BRIC grants can be a 90-10 grant if you qualify to be an economically disadvantaged rural community, then you've got the 10% match. If not, you don't have to be a disadvantaged rural community to apply for BRIC. And if you're not, then it would be at the 75-25. That grant is set. Once you're awarded that grant, you cannot get any additional funds. It's just the type of the grant that it is. There is no avenue to ask for additional funds later. Typically, if you incur any upfront charges for engineering fees and that's typically not an eligible expense to get reimbursed by the grant. But any fees, once you're funded, as long as you don't spend any money before you receive the grant and sign for the grant, any fees incurred after that for your engineering design, the grant administration, and any site work and construction, those are things that are typically considered eligible for reimbursement by the grant. And in this particular case, for a FEMA grant, a hazard mitigation grant, you have to have participated and adopted the most recent hazard mitigation plan. So it would either be a county plan or in the, for an electric cooperative, they have their own plan instead of participating in the county plan. And this is just kind of it's an old, that's just what a presidential declaration looks like. That's what it takes to get the hazard mitigation grant program, the HMGP grant. And this is the notice of interest that SEMA mitigation uses. So this is just an example of one that we've turned in, changed to, it's a generic, but that's the format that we would use. And that was for HMGP, so that's at a 75-25 match. And then just, to sell our services a little bit, why would you want to work with us? This is just a little bio on some of the grant applications that we've submitted, funding that we've been able to secure over the years, as well as the number of grants, the accepted grants. So they could either be funded, and then not accepted. So you can see our numbers are different in between the ones we've submitted and the ones that have been accepted. Sometimes people get a grant, by the time it happens, the grant's not big enough, costs have gone up, and they have to unfortunately decide not to accept the grant. So, so that's just a little bit about TOEF and the process and maybe what we might be able to do to help you if you have any questions or want any more information. We would be glad to try to answer anything that we can.
Great. Thank you so much, Teresa. I appreciate it. And then we're going to go ahead and go right to Kelly with MRPC, and then we'll have a Q&A time at the end.
Okay. Yeah, fantastic. So I am Kelly Sink. I am a project development manager with the Merrimack Regional Planning Commission. We are located in St. James, which is in Phelps County, and we cover an 8-county area in kind of the south central portion of Missouri. So we got the 8 counties and roughly 32 cities or so within our area. And on a discussion of grants, when you have an expert like Teresa do a rundown of what goes into an application and the administration, I pretty much just agree with everything she says. She nailed that spot on. And I don't want my presentation to just seem redundant to everything that she provided us. So I'll kind of talk a little bit differently on some of the grants today and focus on maybe some other parts. So, I know that we have all heard about the IIJA, which is also called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Neither one of the acronyms really flow off the tongue, but there's a lot of money that is available, becoming available, and so on. And I know from my perspective, I've had a lot of calls from mayors, presiding commissioners, all wanting to know how to get in, on some of those dollars that are coming down. So we'll talk about that a little bit, and then just some of the grant considerations. Some of that might sound a little redundant to Teresa, but we're really just trying to hone in and maybe emphasize some of those parts and pieces that are pretty important in grant world. So yeah, so there is a lot of money that is coming from the federal government in all shapes and sizes. And it's going to look a little bit different and a lot the same. So, to get into this a little bit with the bipartisan infrastructure, when it was passed, it's going to provide, over $1 trillion really in total over a 10-year period. And that's going to include $550 billion in new spending, So a lot of the spending, you'll see really is just increasing the coffers of programs that already exist. But there are definitely some new programs that are going to be identified in those new funds spent on those particular programs. And we'll kind of go over a little bit about what those differences are going to look like. So the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act has several main areas of investment. When you break it down, roads and bridges, obviously probably the number one, public transit, passenger, freight rail, electric vehicles. You'll notice those are all very transportation heavy type of areas. By far and away, transportation is primarily funded with the IIJA. However, that's not the only thing that it focuses on. It also has a lot with broadband, internet access, a focus on the electric grid. There's also airports, also under the transportation side of that, and then water and wastewater. So it does try to hit on a lot of the different areas of infrastructure in the nation. But a lot of the funds, of course, will be going to transportation. But for the most part, these funds will be distributed through formula grants. This is not anything new. This is how we primarily get our federal dollars. And this is, when a federal program distributes funds through a formula grant, they're really looking at distributing that to all of the states based on population and then other characteristics based on whatever the pot of monies might be. So if there is a pot of transportation dollars, and they're providing that to all of the states through the formula grants, the state of Missouri is going to get that. That's mostly going to be housed under MoDOT, right? And so that is the way that we see most of our transportation, water, sewer, broadband, a lot of those dollars, they're formula dollars. So they're coming to the state of Missouri, who is then, administering that, doing, projects at the state level, but then they also redistribute that, to local entities, cities, counties, districts, so on and so forth. But there are some funds called the competitive or the discretionary funds. These are some of the funds where local entities can actually apply directly to the feds for the dollars, okay? And so when those dollars come out, that's when the federal agency will distribute the NOFO. I don't know if you all heard Brandy kept referring to the NOFO. That's the Notice of Funding Opportunity. That's what a particular federal agency or administration will offer that out. And you can see clearly on there if a state, a city, an industrial development authority, any of those type of applicants can be eligible for those funds. And then a third more obscure type of grants are called the project grants. These are awarded for specific projects. Typically, you'll see these come. It's that the federal agency has those dollars, and the federal agency has already identified projects that they're going to do with those dollars. So that's really it. The lion's share is going to be through formula grants. So we know that the state of Missouri is going to see, the most of these dollars. There are going to be opportunities for us, local governments and so on to apply directly for some of the dollars. And then hopefully we'll see in the state some of those project grants, coming from some of those federal agencies. So just as some examples with the formula grants, if you all, and I don't know if you have been following or tracking the bipartisan infrastructure law, but you can go to build.gov. It kind of houses the progress and how the funds are being spent and so on and so forth. So when you go to the build.gov and you look up Missouri, and I'm just using this as an example, under the energy section, they announced that to date, approximately 77 million has been allocated to the state of Missouri for weatherization and another 6.9 million to help prevent outages and make the power grid more resilient. So you're like, okay, well, these funds are coming to Missouri. All right. What does that look like for us? But then if you look, okay, so that 6.9 million to help with the power grid, making it more resilient. Then you go to the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. And not too long ago, they just had a public hearing on their bipartisan infrastructure law, grid resilience formula funding. So we know that that formula funding went to the state of Missouri. It's being housed under DNR. So DNR really right now is looking at how they're going to develop their program to allow entities to apply for these dollars to do their grid resilient projects. So that's kind of, just kind of an example of how you see those formula funds hitting the state. Our state is going to develop that program. We will be applying probably to DNR for these funds for our electric grid projects. Another example with the competitive grants, these are the ones that we could apply for directly. I just so happen to have this NOFO sitting on my desk this morning because it's a grant. But anyway, this is the RAISE grant. It's actually one of the transportation grants coming out of the IIJA, we'll call it. And so this is a direct grant that local governments can apply for directly to the state. So the Department of Transportation released this NOFO. This little guy is only about 70 pages long. Not too bad. But anyway, the NOFO really is the instructions on how to apply, who can apply, when the deadline is, how much you can apply for, what they'll fund, how much the match is. All of that information is housed in that NOFO. And allows you to get the information that you need to, basically it gives you a recipe on how to do that grant. So, you'll find those. And so that's just an example of one of those. And then with the project grants, I did do a quick look to see what if any federal agencies had already obligated some project grants. And I did see that the Corps of Engineers has a project that they've already identified. They'll be working in St. Louis, doing some sewer overflows. Some of you may be way more familiar with that project than I am, but they are using almost 13 million of the IIJA funds to help do this project up around St. Louis. And then also the EPA has identified a couple of Superfund cleanups in the state, and they're going to be using some IIJA funds to do that. One is a well project in Vienna, which actually is in my area, that's in Maries County, and then a TCE cleanup project in Valley Park. So that shows you those are funds that those federal agencies have already identified projects that they're going to spend their dollars on. So, really just to be prepared for these dollars as they continue to roll out. The Missouri formula grants, by far and away, I picked out the three main state agencies that are probably going to oversee most of the formula grants. And that's MoDOT. They're gonna get the formula grants for basically all of the transportation dollars. So roads and bridges, airports, transit, all of that. We're going to be looking for MoDOT, to receive those formula grants. DNR, that's one of the big ones because they're going to have the water and sewer, the electric, really anything on the energy wise on that. And then the Department of Economic Development actually has been the lead on the broadband and internet access and stuff like that. So as these IIJA funds keep coming to Missouri, we'll probably look mainly to these state agencies. There are some others, but for by far and away, it'll be these three agencies. So a lot of the dollars are not going to look all that different. They will probably just really just increase the coffers of programs that we're already familiar with. The SRF program for water and sewer, for example, we'll probably, we'll see that there are more funds available under SRF. And so now there are going to be funds for new programs. The electric grid resilience, I think, is a new one for that. But by far and away, I think a lot of these funds are just going to look the same, and the programs are going to look the same. To prepare for grants, applying for grants from the state of Missouri,
it seems like every agency has its own platform that it utilizes. You know, the feds are all somewhat going to grants.gov. It's housing, you know, it's an online platform for most of the federal programs these days, but you know, we've seen Submittable, Salesforce, web grants, in some instances, it's even still paper applications. So depending on which program it is and which state agency is running it, they'll need to, you know, be prepared for any of those particular platforms. And so they're all going to require their different registrations, you know, to get your username and password and all that kind of information. So you want to be aware of that. And then as of right now, we haven't really seen that Missouri has kind of a one-stop shop of housing all of its IIJA dollars. With the ARPA funds, there is. We have one website where we go to MoARPA. We can see, you know, where all the ARPA funds have gone to the different programs, how they're redistributing that in grants and so on and so forth. Haven't really seen that yet for IIJA. I'm assuming, you know, that'll be something that will come out. But at this time, we're really just going to each of the individual, you know, MoDOT, we're going to DNR, we're going and just, you know, and to try to track their progress. Hopefully at some point we'll have that one-stop shop for those dollars too, but.
Say a group prayer when you're done.
Right. And then, you know, like I said, with the federal competitive grants, you know, most of the time you can just go to one particular website. Build.gov is kind of a good one. But then there's also, I put another link on here. This is called the NOFO tracker. I actually have this, you know, dog-eared on my websites, and we'll go there just to notice. But this is where they'll give you the updates on the NOFOs. Which are when the federal agencies are going to distribute these grants on a competitive basis. So you can certainly go there to keep track of, you know, when the different grants are going to come out, you know, directly from the feds. And like I mentioned, grants.gov, most of the federal agencies, I think these days, are putting their applications on this platform. So it's never too soon to go ahead and get registered for grants.gov. The registration process for grants.gov is terrible. I've never heard anybody who has said that they had a great time applying and registering on grants.gov. So, you know, just be prepared to commit a little bit of time to do this if you haven't already. Really, the first step is probably the most convoluted. I sometimes lack the nice words to describe it, but anyway, so you do want to register with sam.gov. That is where the federal government will assign you basically your own user identity. Back not too long ago, we all had the DUNS number, I think, but they decided let's do a different number and we'll just change it up for everybody. So now we have the universal, what is that? UEI, whatever it stands for. Yeah, UEI, yeah. UEI, the new DUNS. Okay. So, so you'll go to the SIM website, you need to register. You'll get your UEI number assigned and so on. Once you have that done, then you can go to grants.gov. Register, but then you want to attach your organization to your registration and so on and so forth. So like I said, it's a little bit convoluted. You certainly cannot start too soon. So if you think at any time you're going to apply for any of the federal grants, I would encourage you to go ahead and tackle that and get that taken care of. So, you know, if you do have a potential project and you've got a, you know, relationship with your regional planning commission, which can also be called a council of governments, or in the larger cities, they're a metropolitan planning organization. But you can reach out to them to help determine if your project and your organization and stuff is eligible. You know, we can help to match you up to the best potential grants for your potential project, look at your eligibility, note your strengths and weaknesses, you know, and then help with the actual writing of the applications and maximizing some of that scoring potential in there as well. And one thing I will say is, typically someone on myself or one of my staff has read through the NOFO. So whenever we get those calls of, can we do this or can we apply for that? We can say, well, according to the NOFO, yes, no, or maybe we point them in another direction or something. Again, on the grant requirements, can't stress it enough. If you do not have an engineer or an architect on staff, which in our area, I think we may have just one town large enough to support its own engineering staff. The rest of our communities need to have an engineer or an architect on board to help them determine, taking a look at their utility systems, determining that scope of work, the project costs and so on, all of that information that is needed to go into the grant application. So we really do encourage the use of your professional consultants to help you pull all that kind of stuff together. As Teresa mentioned, procurement, it's a bugger, and we have to make sure that it's always done right. So you do want to make sure that whatever program you're working with, that you're meeting, that local, state, or federal procurement guidelines. And then never assume, of course, that the grant funds will pay for anything. I've been told this many times over my years. If it isn't documented, it didn't happen. So. Just some of the other grant requirements is, on the administrative side of things, all grant programs are going to require some form of reporting, or they'll have methods and processes for drawing down their funds and so on and so forth. You want to make sure you have the capacity to do this, or that you partner up with your regional planning commission or a consultant like Toth, someone like that who can help you wade through those various requirements, like the financing and the environmental and so on that Teresa went over in more detail. So those are just some of the things to consider there, your professional consulting and then, your capacity, or whether you need to maybe contract for some of that administration work. Just some of the common mistakes with grant applications, of course, assuming that grants are easy. I do get a lot of those calls. A lot of times from a new mayor who just calls up and says, hey, I want some of those grants, that are out there. I say, well, what for? And he's like, well, everything, just give us some grants and we'll go crazy. And that's not exactly how it works. I think, once a community realizes what has to go into a grant and how competitive they are, you realize that's why not everybody is getting grants all day long. And you realize that's why people like Teresa and myself exist. So lacking that preliminary engineering, most of the time when we have a community who calls us up and says, they want to apply for funds for a street project or a water project, our very first question is going to be, what consultant do you have on board? Where are they at in the preliminary engineering process, and so on and so forth. So lacking that preliminary engineering is really going to kill a lot of projects, or at least put them off, for maybe another year while they, step back a few steps and get started with that. Applying to the wrong agency, and the reason why I put this on here is because, there has been a little confusion anyway with with the IIJA. A lot of folks think, well, what do we do? Just turn our application into the White House, or what do we do here? How do we get these funds? Well, okay, so that's where we look at, is it a formula grant? Is it something that's coming to the state of Missouri? Are we going to be working with that state agency? Or is it one of those competitive grants where they're going to release a NOFO and you're going to apply to those folks and stuff? So that's why I threw that on there, is we want to make sure that we've got the right project, the right entity applying to the right agency. Incomplete applications, can't stress that enough. I know Brandy had mentioned they had a team that did like a third-party review of their stuff. I think, that's always a team approach to grant writing. It's not just one person sitting in a corner and writing it all themselves. It is definitely a team approach to make sure that you've got all of the parts and pieces included in that application. A lot of the grants that require match, an issue that we have seen sometimes is that the community starts spending their match before they've even gotten the grant award. Then they can't count that as part of their match commitment, because they spent it before the grant was awarded. And then another thing that we usually try to catch in the application phase is just that they haven't estimated state or federal wage requirements in their cost estimates. They just did it based on their, well, this is what we've usually paid for this or what have you. Typically when you're putting something at including state and federal wage rates on that, it does increase, the overall cost of the project. So as far as contacting your regional planning commission, I think there's 19 or so of us in the state. We've got, pretty much the whole state covered. But most RPCs will have grant writers and administrators on staff. We do have knowledge of other communities if they had issues or successes. So if you call us up and you're like, we're thinking about doing this project. We're like, oh, well, the town, 2 counties over just did something similar and they were highly successful. So let's do that. Or they, totally bombed and it was terrible and let's not do that. But, so we do have a bit of a knowledge base of that we can help to share. And then, just being able to provide that staff from the planning through project completion. I usually get assigned the liaison with the federal or state agencies. So if the mayor or the engineer has a question, I'm usually the one who's routing that through the particular agency to get the answers and so on and so forth. But anyway, outside of that, I'll just kind of throw this up there. That's probably not the most legible thing, but it is the list of all of the RPCs that are out there right now. Just a point of reference, MRPC is kind of the yucky brown one right there in the middle. Yay. But if you do you can go to MACOG online, the little red link down there, and you'll see a much nicer picture of that than what I was able to put into the slide. So that is all I have for you.
Thank you. That was excellent. Thank you both. I appreciate it. So, I think it's interesting that the common thread with all of the presentations today and then Ken's final presentation will be that kind of it takes a village. I mean, there are a lot of people, I think, hopefully we're successful, but we pull together a lot of resources and a lot of people to get this done. At the risk of being indelicate, what do you charge and how do you charge people to do grant applications? And I'll start with maybe Teresa. How do you determine that, or how does that work?
So it's kind of case by case basis and depending on what type of project it is. So especially with a lot of this new funding coming out, it's very competitive and it takes a lot of time. I mean, that's, I think, one of the things that you said that people think, well, everybody's seeing all this money and they all think, well, we should all get some.
Right.
But then just your example of by the time you bring that down, just in one little example, 6.9 million for Missouri, for part of that, when you look at the cost of things, how many grants is that going to fund? Let's face it, not very many. So we have to look at what are we applying for, what will it take? And so it's really kind of a case by case basis based on what type of funding it is. On what do you base it? Like an hourly rate or a percentage of project? So on applications, it would be more based on probably more like an hourly rate, like a not to exceed. So we would say, okay, if we can't get it done in this many dollars, then that's all you'll pay. The rest is, if it takes us longer than that, then it just wouldn't exceed that amount. That way they know going in, because it's also hard on their part. They're going into a very competitive situation. So coming up with spending a certain amount of money when you don't know if you're going to get a grant. And then it goes back to different types of grants that we've done for years. And so the hazard mitigation grant program is sort of like an example that you used, like CDGB. So, when they get selected, it's money that Missouri's getting, and they were selected for that application to be funded. So, if you're getting selected to write the grant and do the administration, it leans more toward just a cost of administrating the grant, which is a percent of the grant, which is funded by the grant at 75-25. So it goes into, you have to look at how many resources do we have, how much time do we have, and how much time can we offer to research and write these new grants, understanding and knowing that a lot of it it's just so competitive. And it looks great. I mean, it looks great. Everybody's seeing dollar signs everywhere. I loved your slide. You know, it's like, oh, and that's what everybody feels like right now. But unfortunately, it's not that easy. So, so that's kind of, I would say typically it would be on a not to exceed at an hourly rate.
Okay. And Kelly, how do the RPCs do it?
Well, you know, and we're structured a little bit differently as an RPC. We're member-based, so our cities and our counties pay a membership, you know, to be a part of the commission. And with that membership, they get a certain number of hours to do grant writing. So so we may have, you know, a city call us up, say we would want to do this grant, and we may just do it all under their member hours, you know, for that membership for that year. But, you know, if a grant is particularly lengthy, you know, like a federal grant with a 70-page NOFO, we may go over those hours and then we'll revert to an hourly contract. And our hourly rates are set up based on job classification. So there's a rate for secretary, a rate for technical assistants, and so on and so forth, all the way up to the executive director. And I would say maybe an average dollar amount, just to throw out an estimate, would be maybe 65 an hour for our members. Now it is more expensive for non-members. So if someone who's not a city or county, so let's say a nonprofit or a hospital called us up to do grant writing, they would be at a non-member rate, which is going to be at a greater rate than our members would pay. You know, it's as far as you know, every grant is going to be different. A good average amount of billable hours on a particular state or federal grant, at least 40 billable hours. And that really depends on whether an environmental review has to be done during the application time or if it can be covered afterwards. If it has to be done up front, then obviously our hours, you know, go up quite a bit on that. But you know, but we've had some nonprofits call us up and say, hey, we only have this much money. What can we get for that? So we might only spend, you know, like 30 minutes or an hour to, you know, review and edit and offer some suggestions and some sound advice on something, because, you know, we work towards within anybody's budget on that. But our cities and our counties are primarily who we work with, and they do have their member hours.
So the takeaway there is negotiable and do negotiate. So I'll go ahead and if anyone out there in grant question land has a question, please feel free to offer that at this time. And be sure to unmute yourself.
Yeah, Elizabeth, this is Skip Schaller, City Monette.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Can you hear me all right? Yep.
Yes, sir.
Hey, I just wanted to kind of pass along a plug for Teresa and her crew. We used her here a little while back on the GRIP grant. It really took a lot of stress off of me. They were very good to get with me to kind of evaluate it and kind of give me feedback whether, you know, is this worth trying to pursue or not? And then once we got the point that, yes, let's give it a try. I mean, it was really good. I mean, I got detailed what I need to get to them, and then they did it. And it was on short notice, and great bunch to work with.
Thank you, Skip.
Thank you, Skip. I appreciate it. Does anyone else have a question or a comment? Going once? Twice? All right. We're gonna, I think, because we're running just a little bit tight on time, we're gonna just skip right on to Ken. I want to thank Kelly and Teresa so much for coming down and doing this. Thank you so much. And again, we will have, these, you'll be able to get these PowerPoints, on the website and feel free to call these, ladies if you have any questions or needs. Thank you again. And Ken Reesner, do I know you?
I think you do.
Ken is the misfortune of having the office right next to mine. So Ken, if you wouldn't mind introduce yourself just very briefly and then we'll go over.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Reesner, and I'm actually the Director for Business and Member Development for MPUA. And obviously, we've received a lot of really good information today on grant and the grant application process. And I'm really not going to kind of go back over that information at all. I'm going to try to highlight some of the things that we've been doing at MPUA and maybe some of the things that might benefit the systems and the members that we serve, and just kind of address, some of the grant applications that we're currently pursuing that is kind of a collaborative effort for the membership. And I think the first thing I want to kind of highlight is that we've kind of put together an internal working group. We've been talking today quite a bit about having different views and different perspectives and different skill sets as we pursue these grant applications. And we've got a really good group. A lot of this stuff that's been needed on a short time frame, and we've been able to accumulate some information and hit most of our deadlines, and some of that's already kind of starting to pay some dividends, for MPUA and the membership. So I just kind of wanted to highlight the individuals that's currently on the slide that's working on this group, and then we're kind of changing depending upon what grant we may be pursuing or what assistance we may be providing to the membership. We'll adjust the technical services necessary. But right now, this group's kind of covering most things that we're pursuing either through the energy, electric infrastructure, broadband, wastewater, stormwater type of thing. So we're kind of covering the whole gamut where we're trying to go out there and find out what grants are available and maybe what needs to be done either by us or by a member utility that's wanting to participate in it. So I think I do just want to highlight that we've got a lot of resources that's in place throughout the state, and we're definitely not trying to circumvent those, but we're also trying to let the membership know that if there's anything that we can do for them as far as helping with the grant application process, the procurement processes, everything that goes along with the everything that takes place to submit a grant, administer the grant, and then maybe even plan and prepare for the projects. Just give us a holler if there's something that we can do for you. But that was some of the things that we were wanting to highlight. And I think the other thing we're kind of seeing a little bit, and it's been reiterated in the presentations prior, is that if there's a way that we can provide any assistance to really come up with a full financial solution where the local funding, the grant funding, or any other opportunities for funding could determine that our project has a viable financial solution, we're kind of looking into that as well. So just wanted to highlight that. And then the first thing I kind of want to discuss is one of the first grants we went after was an Environmental Protection Agency grant for Region 7. And we've actually been awarded this grant, and it's to provide really education and technical assistance for water, wastewater, stormwater type of grants. And it's kind of intended to make sure that there is an equitable approach to these infrastructure improvements and access to funding out there. And back to the key elements of developing a partnership. This is actually a partnership with MPUA and a few of the state agencies in the Midwest, along with Wichita State. And so the partnership is actually giving us additional resources, availability to maybe tap into and help with the application process and any technical aspects that you may be experiencing specifically for environmental, water, wastewater, stormwater type of initiatives. This is a 5-year grant, and MPUA will kind of be leading most of the services that's provided through this grant for the state of Missouri. The grant's been awarded. We still really don't know what the grant amount is just yet. We're hoping to find that out within this first quarter, and we're actually hoping that we'll have the program up and running by March 31st. But a lot of the deliverables within this would be education and assistance, training, one-on-one technical assistance, peer-to-peer sharing, additional guides, any other tools that may be beneficial for people that's addressing infrastructure needs specifically within the water, wastewater, and stormwater areas. You know, one application that was in a competitive process that we've all talked about was the workforce development grant that came through the Department of Economic Development. We put together a full grant application for this funding. And the one thing that's going to be unique for MPUA is that it's actually a recruitment, training, and placement grant. So we've had an extremely successful program in the apprentice line program. But with this one, we'll actually be helping to try to solve some of the workforce issues that some of the communities are facing. So we'll be developing a marketing awareness campaign to actually reach out and recruit applicants to come into the program. Hopefully get them through the training and development they need. So when they get to the communities, they'll be productive the very first day that they're there. So we're kind of excited about this program. We should know shortly whether we have a grant agreement in place or not. But it's kind of one of those things when you talk about competition, the General Assembly had appropriated about $30 million to this program. And when we were going through the interview process, they had received over $310 million of requests for this specific program. So highly competitive. But something really needed and necessary for the state. The one thing that I think we were wanting to highlight is that, you know, through our application process, we were kind of seeking individuals that would be benefited from economic advancement, which most utility jobs would provide that. Anybody that's currently unemployed or been adversely impacted by the pandemic, individuals living in a qualified census tract. And I think we're hearing a consistent theme on how important census data is. Justice 40 information is applicable to so many of these grants. And then individuals seeking employment related to water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So our grant application was just a little under 1.3 million is what we requested. And one thing that's kind of neat about this is that it's going to expand the program and it'll actually address confined space training, underground excavation, as well as water, gas, water infrastructure installation within excavation. And then natural gas operator qualification would be included as well. So quite a few programs that we're going to be able to develop if this grant funding comes through and we can enter into an agreement with the ED on that. So I just wanted to make everybody aware of that. And then we're actually going to be buying some equipment to train and get the skills developed for equipment operators, you know, within this program. I think we've heard a little bit about the GRIP program, and it's through the Department of Energy, and it's specifically being administered by the Grid Deployment Office. And the one thing you hear about GRIP, it's kind of grid resilience and innovation partnership. And I really do want to highlight the importance of the word partnership. But DOE has done it a little bit differently, where they're wanting to have concept papers submitted before they even go through the grant application process. So really, they've got 3 different topics for the grants. First topic was specifically related to grid resilience and industry grants. It's got an allocation of about $2.5 billion from the bipartisan infrastructure law. Concept papers were due December 16th. And we knew this would be a tight turnaround for a lot of the members. And so what we went ahead and did is we developed a concept paper to talk about renewable replacement type of initiatives for the electric system. Anything that we could identify that would improve the hardening and resiliency of these systems, we tried to integrate into the concept paper. That include, you know, replacing overhead conductors and underground cables. Even within this program, you know, geographical information systems would be made available to be able to have more intelligence and more information about your system and be able to plan and coordinate and track where maybe your outages or issues are occurring. But the one thing that was unique about the first topic is that it has a specific set aside for small utilities, and that's being defined as anything that's less than 4 million megawatt hours of electricity per year. That pretty much covers all of our members. We really don't have, based on that definition, a large utility within our membership. So with that definition, 30% of the program funds are specifically targeted for those systems. And then the match on that program was reduced from 50% to 33% local match. So, and the way we kind of approach this is that if somebody wanted to partner and have a innovative collaboration, we would try to make sure that all the dollars that were being utilized would create the greatest benefit and the greatest synergies across the membership by kind of eliminating any redundancies and cost or approach. So with all three of these white papers that's been submitted for the GRIP program, we did try to stick to a common theme or justification for the program is that with municipal utilities being so important for load aggregation and the ability to provide critical data to see how energy is being distributed to the retail meter. One of the things that the Department of Energy and specifically the Grid Deployment Office is wanting to make sure of is that intelligence is available for people to see all the way from the source of power to the distribution of power. So some of the themes and structures that we created for these concept papers kind of stood within a structure of collaboration, you know, trying to identify what standardization should be met, you know, throughout the state, creating these base platforms that would allow customization and expansion as needed by each community. We were trying to justify the synergies of the project and initiatives by looking at this comprehensively throughout the entire state, recognizing that resources are limited and they would be better served from a local match as well as grant funding to be leveraged to the best point possible, trying to eliminate some of the redundancies that would benefit each of the members. We also went ahead and addressed the Justice 40 initiative. We're developing DEIA plans that will be made available if somebody's interested in that, because most of the funding, one of the things you heard from city utilities and some of the prior speakers is that most of the funding will have to be directed towards Justice 40 communities and then disadvantaged areas and stuff. So we're trying to highlight how important that is. And we had already identified that within these concept papers. And then obviously by working together, we might be able to address some of the challenges that the pandemic has created and lingering effects of some of the global events of workforce shortages, supply chain issues, and some of those other things. And I apologize, I didn't go ahead and click for that next slide, but that's most of the things I was talking about right there.
And again, we'll make the slides available to everyone so you know exactly what we've applied for or for what we've submitted a paper for.
But that one covers the concept paper for the first one. And then the one thing is if anybody's interested in partnering or participating in this, if our concept papers makes it through the review process, it's like April or May for the turnaround for the full grant application, which is pretty extensive.
I would see potentially setting up another whole conversation on that if we are successful.
The other concept paper was really focused on smart grid, and it was due at the same time on December 16th. $3 billion of funding is specifically set aside for this. The white paper that we submitted included local distribution system improvements for SCADA, monitoring and control technologies, grid modernization. Some of the things included centralized electric system control and providing redundancy and backup for communities in case of a disaster. And then even trying to integrate some of the renewable energy that's within the portfolio at the transmission level. So the one thing that's different about topic 2 and topic 3, no small utility set aside for these funds. And most of the match has to be at a 50% level for any grant amount that's received. Okay, and then for grid, topic 3, grid innovation. We knew this one might be a stretch for us because of an innovation type of project. But the one thing that they highlighted was an innovative partnership and a collaborative effort. And so we really did try to stress within this concept paper the importance of partnering together, especially for some of the smaller systems and the benefits of that. And then we tried to highlight all the improvements AMI would create for billing systems, pricing structures, everything that would go along with maximizing distribution and then incentivizing demand side management. So really on this one, we're kind of hoping that the innovative partnership will come about and maybe get us through the first round, and then we'll see what happens on that. Now, the one thing is just for all the DOE grants, that was just something that we were trying to do for systems that may not have been in a position to write a concept paper for. And then the other thing to reiterate is the important that this is a program that's going to be over a 4 or 5 year period of time. So there's another opportunity to come about to have projects identified, engineered, designed, and ready to move forward with some of these dollars. And I think the last thing we were wanting to kind of address was the Environmental Improvement Energy Resources Authority. This one's going to be due by February 28th. And I think some folks have probably already seen this opportunity that's out there. The RFP that they have sent out is pretty extensive, and they're asking for quite a bit of information on their proposals. The one thing that we understand is that they're really trying to work towards just coming up with a list of projects that they might be able to apply additional funding for through EIERA for these projects going into the next few years. And so this is almost, rather than an RFP, it's almost an RFI, a request for information. So what we're trying to do is kind of work with the membership and identify projects that may be beneficial for attractive financing terms or conditions within the energy bank. And most of this stuff would be focused on resource development, energy efficiencies, critical infrastructure for resiliency. So there's a lot of common themes between the EIERA program and the DOE concept papers. So those are the things that we're trying to get identified and put into place. And we'll see how that all goes. And we're hoping that with additional funding that maybe some of these projects might be attractive from a financing standpoint. And then that's something else you might think about is something for a project, is it better to have better financing terms or actually grant funding to go along with the project? Because, you know, for $1 million, $2 million, $3 million project, you have to have available funding of almost $1 to $1.5 million to put towards it. Would a financing arrangement be better to try to achieve some of the accomplishments that you're trying to get into your system? And then the last slide is really just kind of identifying the inventory of projects that they're trying to create and maybe where it's being targeted and major focuses. Back to the energy efficiency, conservation, demand management, renewable development. There's a common theme through transportation fuel projects, alternative transportation fuel projects for electrified vehicles. So most of this stuff would be the normal type of infrastructure that you would see within projects from the production to consumption. So hopefully some of these initiatives will have some overlap where they'll be beneficial for the next few years to be able to identify some of the grant funding that may be available and in place that might be a good strategic match. And I think that's one thing that is a good point that was kind of reiterated today, is making sure whatever grant funding you go after really matches up with your financial plans and ability and operational needs, rather than just chasing dollars, making sure you're taking a strategic approach to how you might want to pursue some of this grant funding. And then the last thing is readily deployable projects in underserved areas or priorities. And that's a common theme through all the grant fundings that we're looking at. So kind of rather quickly, those are the things that we're working on internally at MPUA, and be more than happy to take any questions or
That's
anyone would have.
kind of a high level overview. But the bottom line is Ken has responded on, with the group on these DOE concept papers. Does anyone have, and I think eventually we'll be looking for communities to participate with us, and we are, and help, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what we're working to do is create another bite at the apple, if you will, for community members who are interested in this kind of funding, who may need a little more oomph on their application. Ken, do you have any other clarity in terms of?
Well, I think what we're trying to do is put together grant applications that's beneficial for the communities that have maybe limited resources to do grant administration, grant writing. And like I said, some of that would be even going out and contracting for resources, like what we talked about, where we get engineering firms in place and get everything lined up, where anything that could be create a synergy for the different systems is what we're hoping to achieve. And really, on the concept papers, we're trying to outline the ability to get the most amount of funding into system assets. How can we get the assets into the system that's truly going to generate resiliency, hardness, and allow these systems to be modernized, from a technology standpoint. So hopefully that'll pay dividends for folks, but that's really what we're trying to achieve. And if you're prepared to make a grant application, please move forward with that. This is just another way of giving another opportunity in a highly competitive environment for maybe communities to be able to receive some funding and get flown into through their community and get the improvements that they need done.
I think, and frankly, this is a response to a lot of what we've heard at utility roundtables, for shared services, shared assets, shared functions. So does anyone have any questions? I know we're over time already, but are there any questions out there for Ken on this? Anyone? It's a shy group for a lot of folks online. Okay, all right. Well, this information will be posted. I think our next challenge with our group will be also to come up with some options in terms of maybe match and what that could creatively be, so that that's not a hurdle to application. But anyway, more to come on that. And I appreciate everyone's participation and hanging in for 4 extra minutes. And with that, I think, thank you, Ken. Thank you so much to everybody who came. Teresa, Lehman, and Kelly are still here in a couple communities, and the universe that's out there listening to other computers. So thank you again. And you guys have a great afternoon, and give us a shout if you have questions. Thank you. I think we're done. Watching your water, if you needed some. Thank you. I appreciate it. You filled for 2 hours. Thank you so much. I know how busy. That's so. Thank you for driving all the way from Madison.
I have to get back now to public hearing.
Oh my goodness. Okay, please drive safely. If you need something else.
Yeah, I was just hoping.
I will send it out for sure. It'll be your email directed to you. Thank you so much. Yeah. Please feel free to shop at the kitchen and grab a drink or whatever. Thank you.
Wild ideas. A lot of, but it was just like,
Well, we don't have that time.
yeah.
We just.
Had lots of different ideas, but I get one down there on paper.
That's fantastic.
Well, yeah, and that.
I'm going.
It's like we already have 175 people that are just ready to commit on.
You get
Average utility, average. The matter can't do it.
Well, I guess we can.
So if we're. Just don't want to train people that are interested in life.
Okay.
That's it. That's. I think it's.
Give me just a minute.
But. Gladly trade up.
Yeah. I'm good. It's good to meet you.
Chase. Cool down.
Yeah, thank you. Did you text? Did you get the blank in a black folder? Or the.
Oh, yeah, I want those. Yeah, I want those.
Okay.
Take both of those. And I've got a binder.
Get a chance to get.
We did talk to the university and.
You know, it's just like that they do big partnerships.
Yeah.
You know, you think that might get you over, but you're not really interested.
Right, and they had some ideas, but ultimately, and they were realists and said, there's just no way we, in the timeframe, there's just no way we can do anything, so.
Maybe the next.
But what we did is it put it on their radar, and so now they're specifically watching for this stuff.
We
They've
don't
got some ideas.
you know, so outside of the list, and then I come over, because we were talking. That do their stuff, because what they're looking at. So instead of looking at you know, they're right.
Well, the one they've got up there, that they.
And then trying to push this stuff like, like the next thing that.
Well, one of them, they've got-
Idea.
one thing they've got up there, is they, I talked about it at lunch with. I came out of the next day.
So that is what we see. you know,
Marketing.
part of-
It's right here.
Mhm.
And, but we talked about history at lunch. It's having
Yeah, I need.
statewide, things like
Well done.
that.
Yeah.
Like, means to the inside system, our power model. Rather than
Yes,
say
yeah.
about us. And stuff, and say, if you went down to state central leader, people at maybe have already signed up for up rates or whatever they can do stuff.
Mm.
And until we see people respond.
Yeah. There, I think that's what it's, is something that can manage, and there's so many of the useful details that they, nice that they say.
Well,
It's not gonna have to-
you know, we did do health,
So it's gonna.
and I didn't know it was the same program.
I think so. I think.
Wasn't myself.
They didn't really say how much.
I'm excited today. I didn't. So I think that is when we were.
Not too long ago. Yeah, it's things that you guys put for much right now.
Right.
And, you know, and we struggled with this, and they asked us for help.
When you look at.
Then what the great orders are, but we struggled a
And
lot.
how many they're talking about funding
And stuff like that.
they're not giving some.
And that was a prime example of,
You know, if they're funding every time,
you know,
that's a lot.
that were going on.
They didn't say that.
You know, they came to us because we write.
Yeah, I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all that. We don't know.
So.
Yeah, that's
Well,
right.
it's good to see you guys.
Right,
You know,
it's here.
you know, it's like the conversation.
No, I wasn't expecting you guys.
Somebody can do that.
Well, I'm hoping,
We're glad
I
to.
hope that they will be able to find
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. Anything we can make them help,
We're glad to, but I think that opening that door
Yeah,
is really a good thing, but this may.
right, right. Oh, I think so.
Good to see you guys.
Good to see you.
Thanks, you guys.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. See.
So, no, this is fantastic. You know, kind of being connected, and I know about our, the director. They tell me, and on what's going on with our communities and how we can also tie that in together. I think it'd be great. Thanks, Kaz. Yeah. Right, just some like. Yes. Say like. Oh, this is. So now, everybody come to this facility for the training? Okay, so we have cities that send right now. Have one. Yeah. The whole foundation. Oh, yeah. 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 And that's why. So we'll see. As soon as how small. Get closer. See, you know, let's see how we can. Make this something. I mean, it's a great concept. Instead of 25, we can see a radio way through. One organization does it and then. And it's a great concept. So I hope it's one that the funders will,
I think it's what they were hoping to go that way. I think it really is what they're looking for. Because they're, at the federal one, they're not looking. 25 grants when they can fund
Right,
one,
yeah, exactly.
and you can push it out to 25 entities in your membership.
And we've got.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's fantastic.
I'm sure, I'm pretty sure we share that, you know.
Well,
like,
I'm
I'm
sure
you guys can see.
Yeah.
We've got a system.
For electric. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, no, good. It's actually, I didn't know if you're